Welcome to the history section. The period immediately following the death of Oda Nobunaga in 1582 is a classic study in rapid political collapse and then an even more rapid consolidation of power.
It is. Once the immediate threat Akechimitsu had was dealt with, which happened very quickly, the danger to the House of Oda didn't disappear.
It just changed form.
Exactly. It shifted from an external military threat to a profound internal crisis of structure and succession.
And that crisis really came from the power vacuum, didn't it?
Fundamentally, Nobunaga's assassination and, tragically, the death of his eldest son and heir, Nobutada, right alongside him, created this disastrous situation, a disputed succession.
A scenario that had crippled so many other clans during the civil wars.
It was the ultimate vulnerability. Internal conflict just invites your neighbors to come in and pick up the pieces.
So the official leadership structure was just gone. Nobunaga did have two other surviving sons, Nobuo and Nobutaka, but neither of them was a clear choice.
No, their claims were complicated. It wasn't just about their age or experience.
What were the other issues?
It came down to protocol and, lineage. Both sons were from concubines, not Nobunaga's main wife. And crucially, both had been adopted into other houses to cement alliances.
Which would have weakened their legitimacy within the core Oda clan itself.
It did. So they had to rely on competing arguments. Nobu, the elder, based his claim on age. Nobutaka's was maybe more immediate, more popular, based on his role in avenging their father.
But they both had the same immediate goal.
Yes, to set aside the most legitimate heir by blood.
The one-year-old nephew, Sambushi, son of the dead heir, Nobutada.
Right. And a child ruler might secure the bloodline long-term, but in the short term, for military defense, he's useless.
And that's really the core of the conflict, isn't it? The irony is that because these adult claimants, Nobu and Nobutaka, lacked any real force of character.
Or political weight, yes.
The whole contest just became something else entirely. It wasn't about which son would inherit.
No, the real struggle was among Nobunaga's chief captains. They saw the instability and they used the names of these weaker protégés to advance their own interests, to claim Nobunaga's mantle for themselves.
And among those captains, 4 men really stood out in the public consciousness. History tells us that ordinary people even had nicknames for them.
They did, and the nicknames were incredibly descriptive. They were functional. They told you what each man was good for.
So first, there was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He was known as Cotton.
Right, and that doesn't mean soft. It meant he was fertile in resources, adaptable. He could be used for, a multitude of purposes. Logistics, building, rapid military campaigns, diplomacy. He was useful, like cotton.
Then you have Niwa Nagahide, called rice.
A staple. Indispensable. He was a foundational, reliable part of the Oda machine.
And Shibata Kitsui, the main rival.
His was very direct. Attack.
Best at the head of a charge.
A traditional frontal assault kind of general. And finally you have Ikeda Tsuneyoki, retreat. Which sounds negative, but his skill was conducting a desperate but organized retreat, a vital skill in that period.
It's very telling, isn't it? 3 of them are named for specific military functions: attack, retreat, sustenance.
But Hideyoshi's is about adaptability, resourcefulness.
And was it already clear by then that he had risen above the others, that he was sort of the first among equals?
Oh, absolutely. By 1582, Hideyoshi's superior position was pretty widely accepted, certainly by Niwa and Ikeda. They saw him as the logical successor, even if they didn't particularly like it.
The real challenge came from Shibata Katsui.
Fiercely. And that challenge was personal. It was about class, pride, and age.
Right, Shibata was 13 years older than Hideyoshi. He was blue-blooded from an established samurai family.
And he'd been chief counselor when Hideyoshi was still, a menial servant, a sandal bearer for Nobunaga.
So for him to see this base-born monkey-faced adventurer, as the records call him.
It was a profound insult. To see a man of humble origins just leapfrog him politically, militarily, it went against the entire feudal order. And Hideyoshi was so astute, he'd outmaneuvered Shibata before, which only made Shibata's resentment deeper.
So this hostility that had been, I suppose, papered over for 15 years while Nobunaga was alive.
It was now openly bitter. A confrontation was inevitable.
And why just those 2? Why not Niwa or Ikeda?
Because both Hideyoshi and Shibata understood the reality. The time for shared rule was over. The empire needed a single master to finish what Nobunaga started, and neither of those 2 men was ever going to submit to the other.
So a few weeks after the assassination, Nobunaga's great vassals gathered for the Kyushu Council.
Yes, at Kyushu Castle in Owari. This was the moment to decide the succession.
And the council immediately split into factions.
It did. You had Nobuo, the older son, backed by Ikeda, and another rising captain named Gama Ujisato. And then Nobutaka was supported by Shibata and Takikawa Kazumasu.
And Takikawa really despised Hideyoshi.
Intensely. So his alliance with Shibata was a given.
And Hideyoshi, with his usual cunning, just sidestepped the whole argument between the brothers.
Precisely. He positioned himself as the champion for the infant grandson, Sambushi. By backing the dead heir's son, he could claim the moral high ground. He was protecting the true bloodline.
While also ensuring the head of the clan was a baby he could completely control.
Exactly. And after a lot of acrimonious debate, they reached a compromise to avoid an immediate civil war. Sambushi was named the head of the Oda clan.
With Nobuo as his guardian.
Right, which gave Nobuo some formal power. But the real administration, the power to command troops and collect taxes, was given to a board of 4 equals: Shibata, Niwa, Ikeda, and Hideyoshi.
A very fragile piece.
Extremely. And to preserve it, Hideyoshi made some strategic concessions at first. He put up with what the records call studied insults from Shibata.
And more importantly, he gave up his castle at Nagahama.
A very calculated move. Giving up Nagahama made it easier for Shibata to travel from his home province of Ichizen to Kito. It looked like a sign of weakness.
But Hideyoshi wasn't a man to give up a strategic advantage for long.
No. As soon as he was back in the capital region, he acted alone. On his own initiative, he started building 2 massive new fortresses at Yawata and Yamasaki.
Which were positioned to control the southern and western approaches to Quito.
It was a clear signal. He wasn't just a board member, he was taking unilateral military control of the capital region. He was securing the core of Japan, the Tenza, for himself.
Which immediately provoked Shibata and Nobutaka.
They accused him of aiming for absolute dominion, a direct violation of the Kyushu Agreement. They demanded he dismantle the fortresses.
But their threat had a weakness. A timeline.
A fatal weakness. They said they would enforce the demand after the winter snows cleared. Shibata's province, Echizen, was in the mountains. It was snowed in and impassable from about December to March.
So he was essentially telling Hideyoshi exactly when he planned to attack.
He was. And Nobutaka, based in Mino, was foolish to declare war before Shibata could even move. It gave Hideyoshi a perfect window of opportunity.
And Hideyoshi's response.
It was terse, basically. I'm waiting for you. The strong arm will decide who is master. And instead of waiting for spring, he moved. He moved in December of 1582.
A preemptive strike.
A brilliant one. He turned Shibata's greatest strength, his secure northern fortress, into his greatest vulnerability.
So Hideyoshi's first move was the Mino campaign. He marched a large army straight to Gifu and besieged Nobutaka.
Right. This pinned Nobutaka down, preventing him from linking up with Shibata.
And this is where that Cotton nickname, the resourcefulness, really comes into play.
Absolutely. He left just enough men to keep Gifu bottled up and then executed this incredible forced march. 2 days and 2 nights in winter to get to the Echizen frontier.
To Shizugatake.
Exactly. He joined his brother Hideyonaga's forces there and completely surprised Shibata's northern army. They just didn't think a winter campaign was possible.
So Shibata's forces withdrew to the heights of Shizugatake.
A defensive posture. Hideyoshi immediately attacked with 6,000 men. The fighting was intense, it raged until about noon, and then Hideyoshi committed his entire reserve.
And the northern army just broke.
Completely. It wasn't a retreat, it was a rout. The accounts describe it as pell-mell rout and ruin. Men casting aside their weapons, their armor, just fleeing for their lives.
And Shibata himself wasn't even there for that initial fight.
But once he learned his main force was shattered, it was too late. Hideyoshi turned his entire army north in immediate pursuit. Shibata fled with just a few followers back to his capital at Kitanoshu.
Modern-day Fukui. This was his final stand.
It was. And before he retreated into his castle, which was said to be beautiful, roofed with stone tiles, he ordered the entire city around it to be burned.
A scorched earth tactic.
To deny Hideyoshi's army any supplies. Hideyoshi arrived and immediately laid siege to the fortress.
So Shibata, a 60-year-old veteran captain, knew he was defeated.
He knew. So he gathered his retainers in the Great Hall for a final address. He told them he would perform seppuku, ritual suicide, and have his body burned.
To deny the enemy his head as a trophy.
And more importantly, to spare his wife, who was Nobunaga's sister, and his children the outrage and shame of capture.
The account of what happened next is incredibly detailed.
It is. The assembled retainers and their families all resolved to die with him. But it began as this strange, dark festival. Shibata ordered food and drink and music.
They began to eat and drink and sing with great bursts of laughter and merriment while straw was being laid throughout the castle.
It's a surreal image. Then the ritual began. Shibata first killed his wife, Uichi, and his other family members with his dagger. Then he cut his own belly.
And all his retainers and their families did the same.
Yes, a mass suicide. Powder had been spread on the straw and it was ignited. The accounts say the cries and wailings were horrible until the fire consumed everything.
And we know all this detail because of one specific chilling fact.
They left one old woman alive. She was deliberately instructed to leave the fortress and tell the enemy exactly what had happened, to preserve the story of their defiance.
With Shibata gone, the rest of the alliance just collapsed.
It did. Nobutaka tried to flee from Mino, but his own vassals turned on him and killed him.
And what about Shibata's main general, Sakuma Morimasa, Demon Gemba?
He was betrayed by a peasant while he was in hiding. Hideyoshi actually recognized his bravery and tried to recruit him, offered him a large fief.
But Sakuma refused.
Defiantly. He wouldn't serve the man who defeated his master, so that sealed his fate. He and one of Shibata's sons were paraded through Kyoto on a cart, which was a great shame, and then beheaded, a very public execution.
And the last Confederate, Takikawa.
Hideyoshi dealt with him differently. With a kind of contemptuous mercy, he offered him a small pension on the condition that Takikawa shave his head in submission.
A deep humiliation.
For a man of his stature, absolutely. But he was defeated, so he accepted. It symbolized the complete submission of that old guard to the new master.
So with the military threat gone, Hideyoshi returns to Quito and begins to formalize his power.
Yes, and his first act is one of pure political theater. He holds Nobunaga's funeral rites, his obsequies with incredible splendor. He's showing everyone that he is the true successor.
And then he begins a masterful restructuring of the administration. It's all about strategic geography.
It is. He neutralizes the Oda heirs without bloodshed. The infant Sambushi is moved to a different castle, under guard, stripped of all his grandeur.
And Noburo, the surviving son, gets what looks like a bigger fief.
Looks like it. He gets Aize, Iga, and Owari. But it comes with a stern warning. Stay there, administer your lands, and stay away from Kicho. It was a golden exile.
Then he turns to his former equals on the board of 4.
Right. Niwa Nagahide, who held a province with key access to the capital, is moved to Echizen. It's larger, wealthier, but it's also 40 miles further away from the center of power.
It's strategic distancing.
Exactly. And Ikeda Tsunyoki, who controlled province of Setsu right next to Kicho, is forced to exchange it for Mino. The records say he did it very much against his will. He knew he was being demoted politically.
While all this is happening, Hideyoshi is taking direct control of the core provinces himself.
He appropriates Kawachi and Idzumi. He kicks out all the smaller lords from Setsu and dismantles most of the fortresses there.
Securing the capital from any southern attack.
Right. And he puts his half-brother, Hidenaga, in charge of the provinces to the northwest. So within months, the entire military map around the capital has been redrawn. Everyone in a key position is loyal to him, and him alone.
So with the center of Japan secure, he has to deal with the Muchi clan in the far west.
A massive power block, 10 provinces. They could still be a huge threat. But Hideyoshi handles it diplomatically. He uses a truce he'd made with them right after Nobunaga's death.
And his strategy was quite clever.
It was. First, he made sure the Mutri ambassador stayed in Quito so the man could witness firsthand Hideyoshi's overwhelming success against Shibata. The ambassador became an unwitting intelligence source for him.
Which set the stage for the famous demand letter in 1584.
Yes. Hideyoshi reads this letter out loud in front of his own generals first, a show of supreme confidence. He demands the Muri surrender 5 provinces, citing a supposed promise they made to Nobunaga.
And the letter included a threat.
A very blunt one. He warned that if Muri chose war instead, he would, quote, come and look for you.
And it worked.
It did. The Mushi lord was terrified by the letter and by his ambassador's reports. He chose peace. He offered hostages and kingdoms. The provinces were eventually returned, but the point was made. The Muri were now a compliant, if powerful, ally.
But just as that western front is secured, a new challenge emerges in 1584.
A much more serious one. Nobuo, the exiled son, rebels again, and this time he's allied himself with Tokugawa Ieyasu.
And Ieyasu was a very different kind of opponent from Shibata.
A completely different order of man. Hideyoshi himself recognized it. Ieyasu had sound judgment, tenacity, staying power. He was a master strategist. He was the one man in Japan who could potentially hold Hideyoshi at bay.
So Hideyoshi responds with force, marching 60,000 men into Nobu's territories.
And he has initial success. But the advance stalls in Owari province. Ieyasu is dug in at a place called Komaki, with a highly disciplined army of 20,000 men.
Hideyoshi tried bribery first.
He did. He tried to buy off some of Ieyasu's officers, but Ieyasu was too smart for that. He found out about it, told his men to accept the bribe, and then used it to lure Hideyoshi's troops into a devastating ambush.
A major setback for Hideyoshi.
A serious one. And although Ieyasu won that battle, his own forces suffered heavily, so he didn't press the attack. What you get is a stalemate, the Komaki campaign. For months, Hideyoshi's huge army is just stuck in sieges and blockades.
So Hideyoshi realizes he can't win this one quickly or easily on the battlefield.
Right. He shifts to negotiation. Nobuo is easy to deal with, but Ieyasu is cautious. Hideyoshi has to pursue a much more sophisticated alliance.
This is where he tries to bind the Tokugawa house to his own.
Yes, in 1585. First, he adopts Ieyasu's 11-year-old son. Then, he divorces his own half-sister from her husband and marries her to Ieyasu.
But even these major family ties weren't enough.
No. Ieyasu still wouldn't travel to Quito to formally submit. He was afraid of a trap. So Hideyoshi makes this extraordinary final gesture.
He sends his own mother to Ieyasu's territory as a hostage.
An unbelievable demonstration of trust. And only then, with Hideyoshi's mother safe in his care, does Ieyasu finally travel to the capital and submit.
With Ieyasu neutralized, Hideyoshi could then turn his attention to an internal problem that had flared up.
The Nagoro warrior monks. While he was busy with the Komaki campaign, about 15,000 of these monks had descended on Idzumi province, heading for the new city of Shusaka.
Which was still under construction and didn't have its ramparts yet.
So the city was vulnerable, there was panic. If the monks took Shaka, they had a clear path to the capital.
But one of Hideyoshi's officers, Saigama Goichi, had gathered a force nearby.
Secretly. About 7,000 men at Osaka Castle. The monks had no idea. Saiga let their advance guard pass and then ambushed the main body. It was a massacre. About 4,000 casualties.
And the account says they were so rushed, they were cutting off ears instead of heads to count the dead.
A gruesome but effective bit of military accounting. And the local peasants, who clearly hated the monks, rose up and attacked the fleeing survivors with clubs.
There's a naval component as well.
Yes. Konishi Yukinaga, another of his captains, had 70 ships offshore armed with muskets and artillery, and they harassed the monks who tried to retreat along the coast.
So after the threat was crushed, Hideyoshi burned the Nagoro monastery.
He did. But it's important to note his restraint here compared to Nobunaga. There was no huge massacre like at Hiyazan. He crucified a few leaders and let the rest go.
Which had an interesting unintended consequence down the line.
It did. Many of those veteran warrior monks who were expert marksmen went into the service of Ieyasu. They formed the elite guard of 100 men at Yedo Castle.
But in the short term, the whole rich province of Ki fell into Hideyoshi's hands, further cementing his control over the core of the country.
So by 1585, with the south, the west, and Ieyasu all dealt with, he turns to the periphery. First, the island of Shikoku. Right. During the chaos, a local lord, Chosokabe Motochika, had managed to take over almost the entire island. He'd created his own formidable power base.
Hideyoshi's invasion was a massive, coordinated effort.
Overwhelmingly so. I sent 2 main divisions, led by his brother and his nephew, and coordinated their attack with the Muchi clan attacking from the other side.
And the campaign was over quickly.
3 months. Chosokabe saw he was hopelessly outmatched. And again, Hideyoshi offered surprisingly generous terms. Chosokabe was allowed to keep his home province of Tosa.
The rest of the island was then given to Hideyoshi's loyal captains.
Exactly, securing another flank. Then the focus shifts to the northern frontier, the Hokurikudo,
where another lord, Sasanorimasa, had revolted while Hideyoshi was busy with Ieyasu.
A brief revolt. Hideyoshi marched north, captured his stronghold, and that was that.
And he used this opportunity to make more administrative changes.
He did. He gave the province to an ally, and then he finally boxed in Niwa Nagahide, the last of the old Board of 4. He stripped Niwa of half his territory and put one of his own most trusted men in charge of the mountain passes, effectively putting Niwa under permanent guard.
And that just left one major northern power, Uyesugi Kagekatsu in Echigo.
And the story of how he dealt with Uyesugi is incredible. It really shows Hideyoshi's personal audacity.
He decided to visit him. personally.
With only a dozen attendants. He crossed this incredibly dangerous mountain pass, the parent-forgetting, child-forgetting pass, into enemy territory. He just walked up to the border guards and said, "I'm here to see Uyesugi."
Which must have caused chaos in Uyesugi's castle.
An intense debate. Most of the council argued for assassination. Here he was, delivered into their hands. It was the easiest way to eliminate their biggest threat.
But one young counselor, Naoya Kanetsugu, argued against it.
He did. He argued that Hideyoshi arriving unescorted was a profound show of trust in Uyesugi's honor. To betray that trust would bring eternal shame on their house. He said they had to meet honor with honor.
And Uyesugi listened.
He did. He met Hideyoshi and was apparently deeply impressed by his confidence and his geniality. They came to an agreement very easily in a private meeting. Uyesugi became an ally.
So by the end of 1585, just 3 years after Nobunaga's death,
The result is stunning. Hideyoshi controls not just Nobunaga's old territory, but an additional 24,000 square miles. He controls about half of Japan, and it's the richest, most populous half, all in one compact, centrally managed territory.
when you look at that 3-year period, it is vital to compare his methods to Nobunaga's.
Absolutely. There's a significant contrast in leadership styles.
Nobunaga's primary tools were often destruction and extermination. The Iyeyasu massacre is the prime example.
Whereas Hideyoshi showed remarkable restraint. The burning of the Nagoro monastery was the main act of destruction, and even there he was selective. The list of people he actually executed is incredibly short.
Just Shibata's son and the defiant Sakuma.
Whom he tried to save. He deliberately sought reconciliation with major figures like Iyeyasu and Uyesugi. He aimed for political assimilation, not extermination. It was far more strategic.
And beyond the military side, his focus on constructive governance was something Nobunaga never really showed.
No, Nobunaga built fortresses. Hideyoshi, even while fighting constantly, was building an administration, a central system of justice, which was said to be the best in a century. He reformed the coinage for trade,
And began the massive project of a national land survey.
a critical step for creating a stable tax base and a real national government. He was also focused on public order, suppressing bandits and pirates. He was creating the conditions for economic recovery
And at the same time, he launched these huge building projects.
on an unprecedented scale. He improved Quito, built a new palace for the emperor, and an immense fortress palace for himself.
And of course, Osaka Castle.
Started in 1583, it was meant to be the greatest fortress in Japan. At its peak, 60,000 laborers were working on it day and night for 3 years.
The logistics must have been staggering.
They were. He commanded lords from all around to send boats loaded with stone every day. Supervisors who failed were immediately exiled. The pressure was immense, but the result was this incredible symbol of power, visible for miles.
And the city of Shoka grew up around it.
A new urban economic center designed to be the engine of his domain.
All this had a profound effect on how people saw him. In early 1584, the old samurai class was still resentful.
But by 1586, he had surpassed Nobunaga in every way: grandeur, power, wealth. He was so feared and obeyed that he could move powerful lords from one fief to another at will to keep them from getting too powerful. He may not have been loved, but he was esteemed.
And this all culminated in 1585.
Yes. Just 3 years after Nobunaga's death, this peasant's son was appointed Kwanbaku, imperial regent, the absolute peak of political authority in Japan. He had not just inherited Nobunaga's legacy, he had completely surpassed it.
The period immediately following the death of Oda Nobunaga in 1582, it really saw Toyotomi Hideyoshi move quickly to consolidate his control.
He established himself as the new paramount ruler. And for the foreign Christian missions, understanding this initial relationship with Hideyoshi is, well, it's essential.
It is because, as history tells us, this tolerance was very temporary. It was based almost purely on political calculation.
So we should probably start by looking at the early Jesuit establishment right in the wake of Nobunaga's assassination. That was a huge shift in the political landscape.
It was. And the mission faced an immediate challenge. They had to relocate. Their house in Azuchi, which was Nobunaga's center of power, was sacked.
Right. But was that really a major blow? I mean, Azuchi itself was losing its political relevance by then, wasn't it?
That's the key. In the grand scheme, it was a minor inconvenience. The real centers of power were shifting with Hideyoshi.
And what about the Jesuit seminary? That was a critical asset for them.
Absolutely critical. It held about 30 students. And significantly, the research indicates most of them were of high birth.
So the sons of the very elite the Jesuits were trying to influence.
Precisely. They briefly moved to the Jesuit church in Kyoto, but the quarters there were just too small.
Which necessitated a second move, this time to the fortress of Takatsuki for more security.
Yes, and the quality of education in that seminary it's a really interesting historical point.
How so?
The students were often described as having good parts, showing just astonishing intellectual capacity. They were mastering the European curriculum, Latin, other subjects, in just 3 or 4 months.
3 or 4 months.
Yes, a feat that would normally take about 3 years in a European school at the time.
That says a lot about the caliber of the young Japanese nobility the mission was cultivating.
It does. They were building the next generation of Christian leaders. But it also highlights the inherent fragility of their position.
They were entirely dependent on military patronage.
Completely.
Yeah.
They had to follow the fortunes of their protectors. And the key figure in this period was Justo Ukon, or Takayama Ukon.
He and his father gave them sanctuary in Takatsuki.
They did, treating the seminary students, and I quote, as their own sons.
So when Hideyoshi moved to consolidate his own power over Setsu and Kawachi, Takayama was called on to surrender his estates at Takatsuki.
Right. And in compensation, he received a much larger fief of 70,000 koku at Akashi and Harima.
Now, for context, koku was a measure of rice production. It essentially defined the economic and political power of a domain.
Exactly. So 70,000 koku made Takayama a very powerful regional lord. And, of course, the Jesuits followed him to this new territory.
Takayama had already anticipated this, directing Father Organtino Neki to secure a site for a new church near Hideyoshi's huge fortress being built in Osaka.
A magnificent church, as it turned out. It was built in the new city, strategically very close to Hideyoshi's center of gravity.
The first milk was celebrated there on Christmas Day, 1583.
Signaling the mission's official establishment right in the heart of the new regime. The seminarists soon moved from Takatsuki into these new, much more prominent quarters.
We should probably analyze Takayama's policy on conversion here because it seems to create a vulnerability for the mission later on.
It's a critical point.
Yeah.
While he was negotiating his departure from Takatsuki, he made a stipulation that his former vassals shouldn't be scrutinized for their Christian faith.
Which sounds like an act of protection.
It appears that way.
Yeah.
But the research is clear that this was purely pragmatic. It was not based on some broad principle of religious freedom.
That's a crucial distinction.
It is, because as soon as he took possession of his new, substantial fief at Akashi, he abandoned that spirit of toleration entirely.
What did he do?
He gave his new subjects, his vassals, a simple and uncompromising choice. Convert to Christianity, or face eviction from their offices or their land holdings.
So this is a clear early example of compulsory conversion.
Yes. Enforced by a powerful Christian lord, it directly contradicted the Jesuits' public stance of non-coercion. It was a naked use of feudal power to enforce religious adherence.
Now, moving from the fiefs to the court, Hideyoshi's own initial favor towards the mission, starting around 1584, was, well, it was quite remarkable.
It really was, especially given his calculating nature. Father Organtino Neki had an audience with him to ask for land near the Osaka fortress.
And Hideyoshi was known for being quite severe in these meetings.
Very severe. He'd often receive even high-ranking dignitaries with stern looks and total silence. But with Neki, he was notably cordial.
He not only granted the Jesuits a prime site near the fortress, but he also showed a strong preference for Christian customs over those of the Buddhist clergy.
He did. His trust went beyond just preference, though. History records that he entrusted his Christian retainers with his secrets, with handling his treasures, and he gave them command of his most important fortresses.
There's an anecdote that he particularly admired the chastity of Justo Ukon.
He did. He believed it was beyond the strength of man for someone so young, suggesting he saw the Christian faith as instilling a kind of discipline that was valuable to the state.
This period also saw some very influential conversions right at the heart of the capital.
Yes, in December 1584, the baptism of Manas Dosan. He was an extremely distinguished court physician and scholar.
And his conversion caused a significant political commotion.
A huge one. Dosan was born in 1507. He was considered a reviver of medical learning in Japan, and he'd served under powerful leaders before Hideyoshi.
So his conversion at age 77 would have sent a shockwave.
It did. Almost immediately after his baptism, his entire school, and we're talking 800 pupils, also became proselytes.
800?
This mass conversion of intellectual and medical elites was so alarming to the Buddhist clergy that they appealed directly to Emperor Himachi to intervene.
And did he?
He didn't successfully halt the trend, But the very fact that they felt compelled to appeal to the highest authority in the land just illustrates the level of perceived threat.
And there were other court conversions, too.
Several prominent ladies of Hideyoshi's court, and perhaps most consequentially, a woman named Magdalene, who was the secretary of Hideyoshi's legitimate consort. She became a very active and zealous propagandist for the faith within the highest echelons of power.
But I'd argue the most consequential conversions were among Hideyoshi's rising military commanders.
Absolutely. These weren't men of ancient lineage. These were men who had risen purely on merit, which was really the only reliable criterion for advancement under Hideyoshi.
They were the linchpins of his new political order.
And two figures really stand out. First, Kuroda Yoshitaka, known to the Jesuits as Simon Kandera.
He started out possibly as a horse dealer, a very modest beginning.
Very modest. He rose rapidly, and by 1581 or 1582, he was Hideyoshi's chief of staff, an immensely important strategic position. He was baptized in 1583.
And the second figure?
Konishi Yukinaga, or Don Augustine. His background was also humble, son of a druggist in Sakai. The Jesuits called him the Captain General of the Sea.
Which indicates his growing maritime and logistical importance.
And political importance. He held significant sway over the young Ukida Hidei, whom Hideyoshi had adopted. Konishi was baptized in 1583, and his father and brother followed soon after.
So these Christian commanders are now positioned right at the apex of Hideyoshi's military and administrative machine.
It suggests the Jesuits had successfully leveraged religious conversion into immense political power. And this success leads directly to the next monumental challenge, the Kyushu campaign.
This is where Hideyoshi moves to centralize power over the entire archipelago.
And it's critical to see that the fate of the Jesuit mission was directly tied to the subjugation of the independent daimyo on that southern island.
Right, these military actions were much more than just conquest. They were the next essential phase in his policy of national centralization.
And the initial conflict for hegemony in Kyushu was an internal struggle between Shimadzu Yoshihisa Satsuma and Ryuji Takanobu of Hizen.
By 1584, Ryuji was determined to eliminate the last independent house in Hizen, which was that of the Christian Lord Erema, Don Protazio.
For the Jesuits, the stakes here were absolutely existential. Ryuji Takanobu was deeply hostile to them.
He'd threatened to crucify the vice-provincial and sack Nagasaki if he conquered the region.
So the Jesuits threw their full spiritual and political weight behind Rima, urging him to resist. They even presented him with a rich reliquary sent by the Pope to bolster his resolve.
And Arima's resistance culminates in the Battle of Shimabara in April 1584.
Yes. Ryuji attacked with an overwhelming force, 25,000 troops, including an astonishing 9,000 arquebusiers.
A huge number for the time. Arima appealed to Satsuma for help, and their allied force was much smaller.
Much smaller. Led by Shimadzu Ieyahisa, the Satsuma Thunderbolt of War, they started with only 800 men, swelling to maybe 7,000 less experienced fighters.
The battle itself was chaotic.
Very chaotic. Complex maneuvers over hills along the beach. Arima's musketeers were stationed in boats, delivering a deadly crossfire. But the turning point wasn't strategy.
It was an accident.
As is so often the case. A desperate, almost suicidal charge by a single Satsuma captain, Kawakami Sakyu, carried him right to Ryuji Takanobu's command letter.
And the story is that Ryuji was surrounded by priests and necromancers.
He was, and he mistook the charge for an internal quarrel among his own men. He actually called out, inadvertently revealing his exact location.
Sakyu realized who he'd stumbled upon, struck him down, and took his head.
And with their commander instantly killed, the massive Hisan army just broke and fled. They lost 3,000 men.
Compared to only 250 for the Satsuma and Arima forces.
This victory really marked the beginning of Satsuma's ascendancy in the region. Ryuji's successor was ineffective, and Satsuma quickly capitalized.
They overran northern Hego, advanced into Chikugo, and turned their full attention to the once mighty Utomo clan in Bungo,
which had long been the main, though by then weakened, Christian stronghold in Kyushu.
The situation for the Shomo deteriorated quickly. In desperation, the Bungo Council persuaded the Otomo to go to Osaka and seek Hideyoshi's intervention.
And this was the opening Hideyoshi needed. He immediately sent envoys to Kagoshima to order Shimadzu Yoshihisa to halt his aggression.
But Yoshihisa's response was an act of profound public defiance.
He tore up Hideyoshi's letter and trampled it underfoot, a direct insult. This meant the conflict was no longer a regional dispute.
It was now a challenge to Hideyoshi's national authority. It necessitated a full-scale invasion.
And Satsuma launched that invasion of Bungo in late 1586, They captured and burned Usuki, destroying the church and the novitiate. Old Tomo barely escaped.
The disaster culminated at the Battle of Tosugawa. Hideyoshi had sent forces to aid Bungo, but explicitly told them to avoid a general engagement.
But crucially, the local commander was overruled by his military advisor Sengoku and the young Shomo. Their allied force of 20,000 advanced prematurely.
And they were routed, a catastrophic defeat.
Funai fell shortly after. By the end of 1586, almost all of Bungo was under Satsuma control. This forced Hideyoshi's hand.
He began mobilizing an enormous force, designating Osaka as the mustering point.
His total army swelled to nearly 200,000 men, an unprecedented force for a domestic campaign. But his strategy wasn't just about overwhelming strength.
He also employed diplomacy, espionage, and, well, what you might call historical treachery.
A very sophisticated combination. The first element was political deception. He used the recently subdued Akatsuki of Chikuzen as a messenger of disaffection.
To infiltrate Hizen and Higo and win vassals away from Shimadzu.
Exactly, to undermine them from within. Hideyoshi articulated his strategy precisely. He said, "When Satsuma stands alone, like a tree shorn of its leaves and branches, we will attack and destroy the root."
Isolation before destruction.
That was his philosophy, and this pragmatism extended into espionage, with a very surprising ally.
He turned to the Monto sect.
The very same powerful religious organization that Nobunaga had spent a decade trying to destroy.
He contacted their leader, Kenyokosa, and offered him a monumental reward, the return of the Hongwanji Monastery in Kyoto.
And the irony here is just profound. It gives us a key insight into Hideyoshi's ruthless pragmatism.
He's warning about Christian priests accumulating political power following the Monto path, while at the same time he's leveraging the actual Monto sect to defeat his military rivals.
Precisely. Kenyokosa agreed and traveled to Satsuma, ostensibly for religious work. But he brought 2 spies embedded in his retinue.
And no one suspected a thing.
Not at all. The intelligence these spies gathered proved absolutely vital. They spent about a year freely circulating, intimately mapping the entire region.
Information that the Kagoshima authorities had guarded for generations.
This detailed knowledge of the terrain, the ravines, the passes, was delivered directly to Hideyoshi when he arrived in Kyushu.
And then Kenyokosa was compelled to take the next step, forcing the Monto monks of Shishijima to act as local guides for Hideyoshi's troops.
Which meant the invaders, advancing into this treacherous volcanic terrain, had an intimate knowledge of all the defensible areas and hidden routes. Hideyoshi successfully used one religious faction to betray and defeat his enemy.
Proving that he viewed all religious bodies as mere political instruments.
And the final assault on Kagoshima utilized this exact intelligence. Hideyoshi's half-brother led 90,000 men. The main force was 170,000 strong.
The critical part of the strategy was a coordinated attack. 60,000 men sent by sea to assault the Satsuma rear.
While columns led by commanders like Katu, Kiyomasa, and Kuroda advanced over the defiles, guided by the Monto monks.
The attack from the sea was completely unexpected.
Utterly. And disastrous for Satsuma. Yoshihiro's main army was overwhelmed and forced to surrender. The campaign was over.
After the victory, Hideyoshi's actions showcased his sophisticated statesmanship.
Yes, he halted his forces just outside Kagoshima. He spared the Shimadzu house, arguing that destroying such an ancient house would only bring him shame.
He preferred reducing them to a state of complete loyalty rather than exterminating them.
The surrender terms were generous, but politically astute. Shimadzu retained Satsuma, Osumi, and half of Higa, but Yoshihisa was forced to retire and accompany Hideyoshi to Kyoto as a hostage.
This created a new power structure in Kyushu that was heavily favorable to Hideyoshi's new men, including his Christian loyalists.
Exactly. Konishi Yukinaga became lieutenant general and lord of Udo, a 200,000 koku holding. Kuroda Yoshitaka received Nakatsu, a massive 180,000 koku fief.
To emphasize the scale of this redistribution, Kobayakawa was granted a fief of over 522,000 koku.
And there's a strategic tension built into this new structure. Konishi, the Christian, was positioned to monitor Shimadzu. Kuroda was positioned to watch Mushi.
That they were balanced by men like Kachu Kiyomasa, a bigoted Buddhist who was installed nearby at Kumamoto with a 250,000 koku fief.
A classic Machiavellian political checkmate. No single religious or political faction could dominate the island.
This military success, achieved with the indispensable aid of his Christian officers, it really appeared to be the high watermark for the Jesuit mission in Japan.
It did. Yet even as Hideyoshi was making these magnificent promises, the seeds of profound suspicion were already sown.
Leading to one of the most abrupt and dramatic policy changes of the era.
The absolute peak of Jesuit influence came in May 1586. Vice Provincial Koyo visited Osaka Castle with a large delegation bearing generous gifts.
And Hideyoshi's reception of him was marked by extraordinary and I would say calculated cordiality.
He dismissed all the other lords except Justo Ukondono, keeping his Christian advisor close. And he spoke freely with Coelho.
He even claimed he was thinking of reducing half of Japan to Christianity, and that after he conquered China, churches would be built everywhere.
Coelho immediately leveraged this apparent favor to seek specific institutional privileges.
He wanted a license to preach freely throughout Japan.
And an exemption for Jesuit houses and churches from having soldiers billeted in them, which was a common burden on Buddhist temples.
And an exemption from feudal burdens for religious personnel.
Hideyoshi granted a patent for all three requests. He even insisted the phrase "throughout all Japan" be used, emphasizing his status as Kwanbaku, or regent, over the entire nation.
This was a huge political triumph. By 1587, there were an estimated 200,000 converts in the empire. The future looked incredibly bright.
However, the research provides a strong counter-narrative. It suggests that Hideyoshi was simply amusing them and playing with them to serve his own political ends during the entire Kyushu campaign.
He was extracting valuable information and logistical support from the priests. While he consolidated his position, the promises were transactional.
And crucially, suspicion was being actively fanned by key non-Christian figures at court. A senior physician named Jakuin Kokun was one.
He was present at Coelho's favorable reception in 1586.
He was. And he observed the Jesuits' intense efforts to convert men of noble birth. His analysis was astute. He began to sow suspicion that the Jesuits' pretext of saving souls was a cover for the future conquest of Japan.
And this resonated deeply with Hideyoshi.
Deeply. Hideyoshi started voicing this suspicion publicly, saying he feared the Jesuits' virtue was a mask of hypocrisy. He even cited the history of the Mago sect leader who had made himself a prince and nearly a shogun.
The irony, as we said, is that he was saying this at the very moment he was relying on the Monto head as an intelligence asset.
Which shows his pronouncements were a calculated political device. He was justifying control over any group that accumulated too much independent power.
The open rupture then occurred with shocking abruptness in Hakata.
Right after a polite 3-hour visit by Hideyoshi to Coelho aboard a large Portuguese merchant ship. It was a classic move of psychological warfare.
Late that same night, at midnight, Coelho was summoned ashore.
And he was presented with 5 immediate and specific questions that were essentially charges.
The first was why they were forcing subjects to become Christians.
And Coelho, perhaps foolishly, cited Hideyoshi's own recently granted patent that licensed preaching.
The second and third questions addressed political destabilization. Why did they induce disciples to overthrow temples and persecute Buddhist clergy?
Coelho denied direct violent instigation, but the record shows the fathers did systematically encourage temple wrecking by their converts.
The fourth charge was cultural and economic. Why did they and the Portuguese eat useful animals like oxen and cows?
A minor but pointed charge. Coelho admitted it was customary, but said they would stop if Hideyoshi disapproved.
And the final charge was the most damaging.
The most explosive. Why did they allow Portuguese merchants to buy Japanese people and sell them as slaves in the Indies?
This confirmed a reprehensible slave trade was operating out of Japanese ports.
Coelho was forced to admit the practice. He said the fathers had tried to stop it, but only Hideyoshi, by forbidding the trade in his ports, could stop the disorder. This gave Hideyoshi the perfect moral justification for what came next.
Immediately after this interrogation, the exile sentence was read for Don Justo Ukondono Takayama Ukon.
And the following day, July 25, 1587, the Expulsion Edict was published. It ordered all foreign religio to quit Japan within 20 days on pain of death.
Portuguese merchants could continue to trade, but they were forbidden from bringing foreign priests.
The consensus is that this edict wasn't intended as an immediate, absolute eradication of the faith.
It was a strategic tool to test loyalty, assert state supremacy, and curb the church's political ambitions.
Exactly. And the banishment of Takayama was the prime example. He was stripped of his command and fief because he was seen as hopelessly at the beck and call of the foreign priests. He was politically unreliable.
His past actions in Takatsuki and Akashi, enforcing conversion, provided the evidence that his loyalty was split.
A conflict of interest Hideyoshi could not tolerate. By contrast, he pointedly retained Konishi Yukinaga and Kuroda Yoshitaka.
Trusting that their primary loyalty was to him, despite their faith.
It was a pragmatic calculus. Ability and state loyalty superseded personal religious belief.
But the Jesuits were not passive. Coelho and 120 religio assembled in Hirado and resolved not to obey the order to leave.
And when Hideyoshi ordered the loyal Christian daimyo Omura and Arima to dismantle fortresses and surrender Nagasaki, they appealed in person,
They were received poorly.
which forced them to try and circumvent the order through local means. They returned to their domains and successfully used negotiation and, quite openly, bribery.
Approaching Hideyoshi's commissioners in a judicious manner.
As a result, only one fortress and a few churches in Omura were actually demolished. Those in Arima and, crucially, Nagasaki were left untouched.
Which led to a clever legal maneuver regarding Nagasaki.
Yes, Arima and Omura argued that since the territories had been under Jesuit administration, they legally reverted to their own feudal control upon the priests' banishment,
And this argument, supported by trifling presents to the commissioners, was accepted.
which meant Nagasaki remained effectively under Jesuit control, just operating through the intermediary authority of the local daimyo. The law was on the books, but its enforcement was porous.
And Arima even offered widespread asylum to the expelled clergy.
He did. 70 religio moved into the Arima fief. The mission, far from being extinguished, merely consolidated its power base in the remote western maritime regions.
Meanwhile, in Bungo, the situation for the mission completely collapsed.
After the death of old Chomo, the young daimyo, Yoshimune, fell under the influence of his vehemently Christian-hating mother and uncle.
And seeking to regain favor with Hideyoshi, he briefly apostatized and started a local persecution.
He ordered the beheading of 2 Christian vassals for refusing to recant, an attempt to show his compliance with the edict.
But the persecution was short-lived.
It was. The fief's council grew fearful of a general Christian uprising. And, moreover, Yoshimune's powerful Christian vassal, Paul Shigekinexis, openly defied the edict.
He stated that there had always been religious freedom in Japan, and he would not renounce his faith.
And here we see Hideyoshi's pragmatism again. Shiga continued to enjoy high favor with the paramount ruler, who called him the greatest man of war in Bungo.
This sent a clear, mixed signal that military utility was more important than absolute adherence to the religious aspects of the edict.
And Yoshimune soon realized his compliance hadn't earned him any political reward. By 1590, he was reportedly piteously and abjectly whining for readmission into the Christian community.
In 1588, Hideyoshi publicly confirmed his foundational policy to a Portuguese merchant. He stated that the law of the fathers was fundamentally hostile to the kames and hotokes of Japan.
And he then explicitly defined these Japanese gods as lords of Japan, who by their victories and their exploits have merited to be worshipped as deities by the people.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. He's articulating a political theology where any lord could aspire to this divine honor.
And Christianity, by being opposed to these traditional deities, was therefore directly opposed to the lords and monarchs of Japan. It threatened to undermine the very system of divine honor that he relied on for his own memory and glory after death.
The faith was deemed seditious because it challenged the divine legitimacy of Japanese rulership.
And the Portuguese merchant quickly leveraged the threat of trade disruption. He said the King of Portugal didn't want merchants to sail to Japan unless priests came with them to maintain peace among the traders.
And recognizing the critical importance of that Portuguese trade, Hideyoshi immediately modified the edict.
He did. Portuguese merchants could bring priests, provided those priests departed on the same vessel. The research states unequivocally that the purpose of this was the conservation of the Portuguese trade.
With Hideyoshi's attention diverted, the missionaries consolidated their position in western Kyushu.
Konishi, as lieutenant general, used his authority as a loyal subject of Hideyoshi to protect the priests in Hirado and secure their admission into the Gochus Islands. He was effectively ignoring the spirit of the expulsion.
He also intervened to protect the Christian island of Amakusa from a punitive expedition led by Katu Kiyomasa.
He did. He got himself associated in the commission, waited for Katus to lose men in the siege, then leveraged his authority to become sole commander and brokered a peaceful surrender.
This guaranteed Amakusa remained a flourishing center for the faith.
The results were quantifiable. In 1589, 23,000 baptisms were recorded in Kyushu, showing the mission's persistence, all predicated on the protection of loyal, politically useful Christian commanders.
The military reduction of Kyushu, then, was the key event that led directly to the eventual political demise of Christianity in Japan, not through outright destruction, but by subjecting the faith entirely to the centralized control of the state.
The Christian daimyo are no longer sovereign. The mission lost its primary source of independent protection. The end of the fashionable craze for conversion at court showed definitively that personal piety meant nothing when weighed against political utility.
While Hideyoshi employed cunning, military might, and even treachery to subdue the Shimadzu, and later used similar tactics to control the missions, his core principle was consistently applied.
That religion must serve the state. We have to consider the comparison drawn by the research between Hideyoshi and Machiavelli's ideal prince. Was his abruptness, his perceived caprice, merely a strategic device, long conceived, to mask the persistent continuity of his design to eliminate any independent power base?
If Hideyoshi viewed religion purely as a tool of state, a means to map terrain or control a powerful daimyo, does that mean the Jesuits, by engaging so deeply in feudal politics and land acquisition, had already doomed their mission to failure long before the Expulsion Edict was even conceived?
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.